Well, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Alexis Rogers and I'm the customer relationship lead here at Right Capital. And I want to welcome you to our Right training webinar today, which is going to be focusing on introducing RightExpress. Now, RightExpress is going to be another tool that really assists in streamlining the process of prospecting in Right Capital. So with that being said, we are going to be diving into just the key nuances of getting started with RightExpress, and also how you can start to leverage it to better prospect and also to enhance your prospecting initiatives. So we're going to walk through the actual functionality found within RightExpress, how you can easily determine who is still in that phase when it comes to that prospecting phase. And we're also going to walk through how you can also leverage this when it comes to any future initiatives with a couple of key templates as well. Now, towards the end of the session, we're also going to be diving into the different advisor resources you always have available to you when leveraging Right Capital. One of those resources being that during this webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section and type out your questions there. More than happy to address any questions you guys might have when it comes to RightExpress or the details of what we're going to be covering today. Now, switching gears into Right Capital. Now, when we first log in Right Capital, we're brought to what is referred to as the advisor dashboard. This is where we will find both our clients list, where we'll be able to create new clients, access existing ones, and we're also going to find a lot of other modules that are going to be your advisor management level stations. So there's going to be a couple of key pieces we're going to be addressing today when it comes to streamlining the prospecting initiatives you're looking to launch or further enhance with Right Capital. But first, I want to address how to actually leverage RightExpress and just showcase what it is and the different functionality behind it as well. Now, in general, when we access our client list, you will now see that you have the ability to sort your clients by planning type. Planning type is going to be referring to whether or not you have the full planning, which is the standard of what you might have been using before for all clients and prospects. But now we also have the addition of the Express piece. Now, Express is going to be focusing on RightExpress. This is really going to be aiming at prospecting because this is going to be a very focused viewpoint when it comes to financial planning, which we'll get into in a second. Now, in order for us to determine who is currently from my client list in the Express phase, we can sort from our client list from here by selecting that planning type. We will also see for reference, whenever we are looking at the client list, this little lightning icon that will determine for us that we have this client still in the Express phase. Now, when we do have somebody in the Express access, we will see that in another reference point, there's going to be an Express access tab right here. And we will also see for reference that I have this client under Express for planning type as well. Now, this is going to be an important field we're going to come back to later because this is also the field that we click into to adjust and transition somebody out of the Express planning phase. But we'll showcase what that looks like later on when we're ready to do that when we finish with this client plan. Now, just to note, under Express Access, this is where we manage for this existing client what they have access to. Now, one thing that I want to note when it comes to the first way we can leverage Express Access, which is us creating a new prospect client, we're going to be able to do that by clicking on the downward arrow right here. And we're going to see the option to click on Add a New Express Client. When we add a new Express client, this is where we can go to then determine who the first name, last name is for this client. And we will also see here the field to enter their email address. So we have the ability to invite this prospect to help with the planning process straight away. Now, I'm going to be diving into in a couple minutes what the client's perspective looks like because they have a little bit of a different viewpoint. That's going to be a nice visual layout for them to determine where they are in the process. So our access as advisors is going to look a little bit different. But when we are adding a new Express client, we would determine right away which specific tools we want to grant them access to. Now, the defaults, before we get into creating templates where we can make adjustments, the defaults that we have available, and this is what we are going to be seeing, is we have the ability to select either just Social Security for this prospect. Maybe this is an initiative that I launched, for example, that's really targeting Social Security filing and different strategies. We also have the ability to just target normal retirement goals as well. We can focus on debt, risk, tasks, and vault. Now, this is the option for us to determine that we want to just select one tool to get started with a new client on. But we also have the option to leverage templates, which I'll show us how to create in just a couple minutes. That can also allow for us to have additional selections. Now, once we do add a new Express client, that is when we'll see them from our client list from here, and we can select them from this client list, like Rick Grimes, for example. And we have the option to click on this Express Access tab. And this is where we can go to then determine which of the planning focuses we're going to be looking at with this prospect. So for example, I have selected everything for this client, just so that way we have a little bit more of a preview here of what that process looks like. So we can select Social Security, retirement, debt, risk, task, and vault. One thing that I want to note straight away, similar to those of you that are familiar with the planning access selections, we also have the ability to rearrange the flow here. So if we want to focus on vaults further on in the conversation or in the client access especially, we can just drag and drop from here, for example. Now, whichever selections we come back to make, we can always hit the save button, and that's going to reorder the flow and also what we're going to see when we open up this client plan. So we're going to open up this client plan by clicking on the arrow icon. And another thing I want to note is that we will only see that Express Access tab for clients that are in the Express planning phase. Once we exit out of that phase, that's a reversible change. They become a full comprehensive client. So this is going to be something you'd only see for clients that are in the Express Access that we either created, or I'm going to show us in a couple minutes how we can leverage it when it comes to prospecting leads URL as well. And this is also a feature that is only going to be available for premium and platinum users. So if you're basic, you might not have access to this right now, which you wouldn't unless you upgraded to premium or platinum. But we're going to walk through some of those other nuances later on in the conversation. To start with here, we can view the first thing that I have selected for the Grimes family, which is focusing on vault. So one thing that I want to note straight away that you're going to see, regardless of whichever pieces you selected, you're going to see here that the first thing we're going to be addressing with the prospect is going to be the same for any client plan that we create, which is who are we planning for? So we will still see a similar data entry cards from here. We'll still be able to click into the client card, and we can enter their first name, their last name, their birth date, planning horizon, meaning the age at which they pass away, and the state of residence as well. Same thing for the co-client. We can enter those other parameters. And you also, even in this particular Express Access mode, can still leverage notes. So especially if you're looking to open the line of communication to a prospect and you want to leave a note as you're looking to maybe start to further that communication and relationship with them, you can still add that note directly into here. You'd mark it as shared with client, which means the client could access this or see this note if they have access to the module, of course. And this might be you kind of stating your intention or just leaving a note of saying, hey, if you want to get to more comprehensive financial planning, feel free to book a call here or otherwise. And you will also still have the option to mark a note as not shared with client. So if you're leaving a note for yourself of saying, hey, this seems like a great prospect, seems like they've got some great potential, you can leave the not shared note here as well. And that's going to be just internally facing, not viewable by the client. And the same thing for us being able to also add participants from here. So we can still incorporate other family members, whether it's actually other family members, grandchildren, or children. But the one thing that I want to start to highlight too, especially as you start to proceed with the additional steps included in any of these options that we've selected for Express Access, we're going to see a little bit of a different purview. So we click on the next button, and this is really going to isolate Vault because that's the specific option we have selected currently. One thing that I want to note and highlight as well, especially for those of you that are already leveraging templates, if you have created Vault templates, for example, and you have set that as the default for new clients that you create moving forward, you will see that that's going to be pre-selected and pre-filled for you because you've set that as the default. So for example, I have already incorporated that as part of my practice. So we're going to see that's all taken care of for me. But if I wanted to start to securely exchange files with the client, I can do that from here. I can also create additional folders as needed, and I can also remove any of these if they're no longer relevant for the client. And we're going to dive into in a couple minutes how you can set defaults like this to streamline your process in general. But I just want to highlight straight away, especially if you are leveraging this as part of your practice when it comes to data collection or any sort of documents, and you're leveraging the Vault templates already, because I see that's a couple questions that people are already asking. that is going to be something that's already available and is baked into this. Now, what's going to be an important kind of step here is when we click on the done button, that is going to bring us to the next step of whatever we have selected of the planning process for this prospect. So for example, if I click on this drop down right here, I can also see for my reference, what are the other included pieces of planning for this prospect. We can see it's exactly what I had selected under the Express Access tab. That includes Vault, Social Security, Retirement, Debt, Risk, and Tasks. And I can also easily toggle between all of them by just using this drop down. So if I wanted to toggle to debt planning or any of the other ones, I can easily do that from here. But we also have the option to kind of follow the normal flow of the conversation or the steps that it's kind of guiding us down by just clicking on the next or done button. One of the other things that I want to highlight, especially as we're looking at something that is going to be similar to our initial steps of data entry, meaning that this is kind of holding our hand and the client's hand in terms of entering this information, that we always have the ability to toggle back and forth. So for example, if I move to step 2, where I'm going to be adding basic information about the client, I can always toggle back to step 1 by just clicking on it from here. Another thing that you will notice just to streamline the data entry process, because some of the information that's needed for all the different planning topics we can select, like Social Security, for example, retirement, debt, risk, all of those, that first step that we just covered of adding family information, meaning addressing who we're planning for, because we already filled that out initially, we're now automatically going to be brought to step 2 for some of the remaining steps. So you might have noticed that's exactly what happened. It brought us forward in the conversation. Same thing for if there's any sort of repetitive information. So once we start to enter things that are going to be focused on this planning topic, you will see that it's going to push you forward in the conversation or the process in general. So for example, I want to dive into some of the changes that you're going to see when it comes to data entry that is specific to just the Express Access. I also want to highlight too, Express Access in particular, because it is going to be focusing on the idea of the prospecting, it is going to be leveraging the goals-based planning methodology, which is going to be really focusing on the information we're going to be highlighting from here. It's going to be focusing on those goals and the income, or I should say the savings that we've kind of input from here. One of the things that is going to be focused on in particular that is relevant for, say, Social Security, we're only going to see these cards highlighted here just for us to carve out the information that is needed to provide an output for Social Security, for example. So to start with, we can address the retirement age for this family. So I can click into this card, and the client can also do this if they have access to their planning access. We can then select and indicate when are the clients planning on retiring. We will also see here kind of nomenclature of what this means. And we also have the ability to still toggle to specify calendar month for retirement. And we can also enter the salary. Like I said, so when we do have Express Access for the client, we are going to be focusing on just the data inputs that are a little bit more of a simple approach with this particular access mode, because this is really aiming at just collecting the minimum information needed to create an output for you to start to prospect. We're going to dive into what it looks like when we transition somebody off of Express Access in just a couple minutes. So to start with, we're going to be entering the salary for the family. It's going to be assumed to be growing with inflation. Now, for those of you that are familiar with RightCapital, this is going to be different than what it looks like when we're entering salary today. Salary cards, you'll notice when you actually are using the full comprehensive planning modules, there's going to be a lot more fields for you to enter additional information. But because the idea of this particular approach is really targeting prospects where we might not have all that information readily available, things like, are we going to be excluding that from Social Security tax or just other sorts of nuances, we're really focusing on just what is needed to have a Social Security calculation, for example. The next card that's going to be relevant for Social Security is, of course, the Social Security cards. So from here, we can start to toggle on what we are expecting in terms of this current filing age or the current path. So we can enter that from here. The data entry is going to be similar to the actual Social Security cards you're familiar with already. So we can enter from here whether the client's going to be filing at full retirement age, which is going to be based off that birth date we entered in step 1, or if we wanted to specify a different age, we can select Rick's age. We can also tie it to his retirement age that we just entered. We can also still fine tune this to be his filing month of either birth month or a different calendar month if needed. And then further down below is where we indicate how we want to calculate Social Security benefits. So we still have the full options here when it comes to the comprehensive Social Security calculations. And so this particular approach, because we're isolating Social Security, a really big planning tool or niche in general, we still have full flexibility here in terms of us determining, do we want to use simple estimate for the Social Security calculations? Just to kind of provide additional context there. That's going to be that idea that we're pulling from their active salary to project forward and backwards what the historical covered earnings are to then project what the Social Security benefit will be. Now, that's the reason why that salary card is there and available for us to input information into. We also have the option to input that we want to calculate the Social Security benefits for this client based on Social Security statement value. And we can then indicate what age we're looking at on the statement, how much they'd be receiving at that point in time. And another thing I want to note too is that we still have that comprehensive Social Security calculation. So even if we indicate they're going to be filing, say, at full retirement age up above, but maybe we're looking at the statements age 62, the system's automatically going to be calculating any sort of delay filing credits if that were applicable, early filing penalties if that were applicable, or vice versa. The third and final option when it comes to calculating Social Security benefits is to enter historical covered earnings. So if you wanted to take that approach with the prospects, especially if maybe the prospect is more inclined to provide this information, we can enter that information down below and use that to calculate Social Security benefits. The final option, which is probably not the option we'd be selecting if we're using this for prospecting, is no Social Security. So if we wanted to turn off Social Security calculation for this particular client, we could by just selecting no Social Security. That would turn off all calculations that would occur, whether it's their own retirement benefit that they could have been eligible for, spousal or otherwise. In this case, we're going to leave simple estimate selected. Once we make those adjustments to both client and co-client, we can click on the next button, and that's going to take us to step number 3, where we review the outputs. This is where we'll see a lot of those key visuals that we are already probably highlighting in our normal process when it comes to targeting Social Security. Starting with the comparisons visualization, we can see here, if we click on the actions, for example, we can see for reference what the optimal filing age is, and we can also compare it against their current strategy. And we can see how much more or less we're going to have in terms of Social Security dollars between those two strategies. Just as a reminder, the Social Security tool is going to be looking at that idea of which filing age provides the most in Social Security dollars. And that includes that comprehensive approach of the different filing ages for each client and co-client, any spousal benefits that would have been applicable, or other benefits that they're eligible for. One of the other key visuals we can see from here is the cumulative cash flow comparison, very popular in regards to its break-even age. So if we still want to highlight this, you're going to see that as a key visual available from here. We can also see the summary section, which is going to show us how much in total Social Security income we would have from any of these different filing strategies. And once we're ready to move on from this particular planning tool, we can click on the Done button, and that's going to bring us to the next stop in terms of our conversation for this prospect, which is going to be focusing on retirement. Now, you'll notice that when we're leveraging the Express Access tool, the data entry is going to look slightly different because it is really targeting that really streamlined and simple approach when it comes to just collecting the information that we might have from a prospect, meaning we do not have all the comprehensive information available to us, especially when we're just first meeting this prospect or using one of the leads URLs in particular. So we'll see, for example, invested assets. So this is going to be extremely different in terms of our normal net worth entry. This is where we would be capturing here, because we're focusing on the retirement conversation, how much we have in invested assets broken down by the tax deferred, taxable, tax-free buckets by client and co-client. So very different approach when it comes to this particular conversation piece. So instead of the net worth module you might be familiar with, the invested assets section is where we'd be entering, at least for this particular approach, the taxable amount that we have for the client and co-client, the tax deferred, and the tax-free. So it's going to be a lot more of a really refined approach that's really going to be focusing on the information that's needed to provide that conversation piece, and at least to spur the conversation forward when it comes to this prospect. We can then designate how our investments are closely allocated in terms of just the standard default model allocations you might be familiar with already. Once we select that from here, we will then hit the save button, and it'll be using that rate of return associated to that particular allocation to grow those particular invested assets. Same thing with savings. When you click into the savings card now, that's really going to be focusing on breaking it down into taxable, tax deferred, tax free. So we can make those adjustments from here. Hit save. And then we'll see some of the other information that I entered before is going to be pre-filled for us, just because we're not going to be, necessarily repeating some of this information unless we do need to make changes. We can then enter the retirement monthly living expenses. We'll see Social Security's here for reference as well. Salary, retirement healthcare costs. This is going to be focusing on Medicare. For example, it's going to be focused on some of those other retirement healthcare costs and long-term care costs as well. So these are going to be some of the pieces of information that is necessary for the retirement picture. We also can incorporate additional goals, for example, or income. So if we click on add, we can add new goals. So especially if we're trying to also capture in this retirement conversation that they want to take a vacation, they want to, have a charitable giving goal or otherwise, we can add that from here. We can also capture some of the other important information when it comes to retirement planning, which is going to be some of those other stable income products we might have. So if somebody has a pension where we're going to receive pension income off of, or an annuity, we can add that from here. And when you hit the next button, we're going to see the outputs based off the information we just entered. So now we're going to see the visuals that are important for the retirement conversation, which is that probability of success. That's still going to be looking at the Monte Carlo simulations, those 1,000 trials of market volatility, and it's a percentage of those trials that make it to the end of plan without running out of money. So that's going to be considering those pieces of information we just entered. We will also still see the action items. So if we're trying to create a proposed plan and work with the client, for example, and saying, hey, we're this prospect, we're trying to win them over. So maybe we're trying to say, let's see what we can do to help you retire earlier with just the bare minimum of the information you just provided. We can then make that a proposed change from here. Hit refresh to see how it impacts that probability of success. Maybe we're also looking at different filing ages, for example. And we can also click on the confidence chart to see the visual of where those trials end up over time as well. So like I said, this is going to be a really refined point of view. The data entry is going to look kind of similar to the profile cards layout, but some of the information you're entering is going to be very specific to the prospecting point of view. Now, one other thing that I also want to highlight that is going to be an important thing to note is going to be the client's perspective, because clients do have a slightly different point of view when it comes to the RightExpress view. So if we go back to the advisor portal real quick, and once again, I want to note, if we go to Express Access, you do have the ability to revoke access or add additional pieces. So if we needed to add more or remove some of these modules or tools that we're focusing on, you can always do so by just clicking into this section. But one thing that I want to highlight is we do have the ability to see a preview of what the clients view for RightExpress. To do that, we can click on that client from the client list. We can then go to Express Access once again, click on the downward arrow, and then open in client access mode. And then from here, one of the first things that you're going to see, the data entry is still the same, but the key difference you might have noticed is that there's going to be a home button. This home button will bring the client to this dashboard here where they can track where they are in terms of completing the different topics that we're exploring. We can also see all the topics that they have available to them to explore. This is going to be the point of view from the client, and the client can click into any of these to then start to continue to either complete this process for, say, risk. And they can always go back by clicking on that home button. Same thing for task. We can easily toggle between each of them, but they also still have the option to use the drop down to access any of the other planning topics. So from here, we can see any tasks we've assigned to this client. We also can add new tasks for the client as well, if desired. And you can also assign any task templates you've already created. I just want to know as well. So the tasks, risk are going to be pretty similar to what you already are pretty used to when it comes to the actual data entry and the outputs. But just to note, the main difference when it comes to the client's perspective of how prospects, we should say, can view this is that they're going to have access to this home icon, which is going to provide a tracking dashboard essentially that showcases where they are in all of the steps that we're looking at exploring with them, but also where they can view all of the different topics that they have available to them in the prospecting mode. Now, some of the other pieces of information that is really important for us to be covering today is how you can start to leverage this in your practice, and also how you can start to further refine how you plan to use this in future initiatives. So one of the first things that's going to be important for you to be able to do is to create templates when it comes to Express Access, because the default planning options you have available to you are going to be focusing on just one specific topic. If we're wanting to leverage multiple kinds of planning topics, that's when the templates comes into play. So if we go to the three dots in the upper right-hand corner, under templates, we're now going to see Express is going to be at the top right-hand corner of the screen. When we click on the Express option, we can click on the new template button to add a new template. We can then click into the title to retitle this one. So let's say this is going to be half access. We'll hit the check mark to save the name change. We also can click on the three dots to rename it, or copy off of this and build from there, or delete it if it's no longer needed. And then further down below is where we select which pieces we're incorporating with this particular template. So we're going to click Social Security, retirement, debt, just to start with. And let's say, for example, we're also incorporating Vault. We also can rearrange the flow from here. So maybe Vault is the first thing I like to see clients complete. We can then hit save. And what that means is that going forward, whenever I look to create a new prospect under the RightExpress kind of tool, we can go to clients, click on the downward arrow from here, add a new Express client. I can enter their first name, their last name, email address, and then from Express Access, I can then select that particular template, and that would grant them access to, whatever we had indicated from there. Now, if we wanted to invite them straight away to be participants of this planning process of the prospecting tool, we can click on the invite your client to start, or I can just click on start. And then later on, once I'm ready, I can always go to the client access tab, and then I can input the client's email or the co-clients and invite them to help with the planning process for the prospecting mode. Same thing when we go to Express Access, because we've created a template, we now have the option to select a template from this dropdown, and that will just pre-fill and rearrange everything for me based off of those selections. So if I wanted to change Christopher Robbins' access and the Express Access we're using, we can do that from here. Now, another very important piece to how you leverage this in prospecting initiatives is how you leverage this in conjunction with any sort of leads URLs that you're using or looking to use in RightCapital. So if you go to the three dots in the upper right-hand corner, under client settings and under client groups, once again, three dots, client settings, client groups. This is where I can first go to create new client groups if I need to, but it's also where we can go to start to generate leads links. Leads URLs in general, if I click on generate for any of these, what that will do is it'll create a URL that I can copy, and then I can say, put this maybe in an email blast or however I run my prospecting initiatives, and a prospect client can click on that leads URL, and it'll create a prospect client under our profile as advisors, so they can then start to access RightCapital and be listed as a prospect, for example. Now, one of the other enhancements you might be noticing is we can create unique leads URLs for every single individual client groups. Now, where this is going to be very beneficial for us is when we're looking to branch off into specific niches when it comes to prospecting. So taking that idea of maybe we are really targeting Social Security as a particular initiative. Maybe we're rolling out that as a particular way to really create and generate a lot of prospects for the firm. We can create a client group specific to Social Security. We can generate that leads link from here. Once we click on generate, we would then see the option to copy that leads URL, and then I can put that out there in the world for my prospects to start to use. But what's going to be important from here for any sort of leads URL that we are leveraging is what we select for the starting type. So for example, the default starting type from the leads URL at least is going to be full planning access. That's going to be what we're already used to. That's the comprehensive, financial planning. But if we're trying to use this for prospecting initiatives and we want to use that RightExpress tool, we'd want to select from the starting type dropdown Express. So once I hit save after selecting starting type Express, the next step that I'd want to make sure that I'm doing, and we can do this for all client groups, as you can see, is to be clicking on the edit button for default templates, because that's going to open up a drawer that then allows for us to set the standard for what we want to see for the default template selections for all new clients that are going to be essentially signing up from that prospecting URL. One of the most important things here being when we're leveraging RightExpress, if we have especially created a template of what we want to see for this particular client group, when it comes to Express access, we want to select that from this drop down from default Express access. We can then select that template from here. Or in this case, if we were using that example that this is my Social Security initiative, we're really just focusing on Social Security from here, I can just keep that selected and hit save. Same thing for any of my other leads URL initiatives that I'm doing. I can click on this edit button. And for example, in this one, I want to make sure that I have my full Express access selected for my main prospect group. I can make that distinction for this individual client group. And like I said, if you have already created templates for, say, Vault, which is going to be another piece that is included in my full Express access template, I can set that I have a default template for those folders just to further streamline my data entry process or further streamline my prospecting process. I can select that template from my dropdown. So for example, I have one created for beginning documents that I always use when it comes to onboarding prospects or clients. I can select that from here. Once we hit save, that means all my new clients that are signing up from that leads URL are going to be leveraging those defaults as well. Another thing that's going to be beneficial when it comes to tracking all of those leads that are signing up from that link. If we click on the view button from here, once again, we can either start to copy that leads URL. We can also see for reference, how many signups have we had from this leads URL. In this case, I have one, and I can see who that client is, when were they created, and I can also launch that client plan as well. So if I'm trying to see, maybe I'm not familiar with Ellen Ripley, I want to see what's going on with this prospect, I can click on the arrow icon, and that's going to bring me to their client plan. So you're going to see this is going to be a nice way to just kind of track any movement from here. And another thing too, let's say, for example, we needed to deactivate this leads URL for any reason, whether it's maybe this initiative has expired, maybe this is something that we're no longer pushing, we don't want anyone else, we have too many prospects, too many clients, we're shutting this down. We can click on the delete button from here, and that will delete the leads URL. So that's just going to deactivate the leads URL, that prospect URL. So that means going forward, nobody can create new prospect clients from that leads URL specifically. What this does not do is it will not remove any clients or prospects created from the leads URL. So this is purely just a way to deactivate that link. So that way, if you're trying to say, hey, I don't need any more prospects, I've been pretty successful with this outreach, I can deactivate it. And then in the future, for example, if I deactivate this one, I always have the option to generate a new one and start that initiative all over again. So you can always click on that generate button and create new leads URLs. And just as easily, I can remove it and start over. So this is really one of those things that's intended for you to be able to adapt this to your practice as needed. And especially as your needs as a firm grows, maybe you have too much of a wide prospecting and client base that you need to deactivate all these links. You can always come back into here kind of in a rotation, generate new ones, deactivate them, and then generate some more. Now, one of the other important things that's really important to highlight when it comes to leveraging Express Access is how to transition clients off of that prospecting phase. So let's say, for example, with the Grimes family, we have, and they have also participated in completing the prospecting process. We've won this client over. We're now ready to take it to the next step. We've said, hey, this is what we can do with just the bare minimum of information you provided us. Let's take it the next step further and start to really fine tune and get into some comprehensive financial planning. We're looking at maybe tax smart strategies. We're looking at Roth conversions. That is when I'm going to click on this client from the client list. We're going to, once again, we're going to stick to overview. We're going to click on the planning type option from here. And then we're going to use the planning type dropdown to then select full planning. And once I hit save, it's going to show us a kind of message here that's going to tell us this is an irreversible conversion. So we're going to be fully entering this client into the full planning module. So it's not going to be something that we can convert back to Express Access. So this is a permanent change. So we're going to click on the confirm button from here. And they're now going to be outside of that Express Access type. So once again, I'm going to search for Rick Grimes for my client list. We're no longer going to see here that little lightning icon. But now when you click on the arrow icon, we're no longer going to see the isolated purview. We're going to see the initial steps of data entry when we do have the client creation process. Because there's going to be pieces of the plan that we still want to make sure we're entering. Now that we've phased this client off of what's referred to as the Express Access. So once again, we can click into any of these to make adjustments if they let us know, hey, we actually have gotten the Social Security statement from the administration, whereas maybe when we're focusing on that Express Access, they weren't familiar with that. So we taught them what that was. We can make adjustments from here. We can then still click into the next button. But one of the things that I do want to highlight that is going to be different for us when it comes to transitioning off of that particular mode is that you're going to see slightly different cards because of the unique data entry that was available under Express Access. Once we exit off of that, you're going to see some unique data entry cards, like I said. Now we're going to see for savings, this is focusing on those saving contributions, those planned contributions going towards building our assets in the future. We're going to see it's broken down by taxable, tax deferred, and tax free. And that is based off of what we had entered in the Express Access tools. So this is very different than what we might be used to already. And I'll show what it looks like for a full comprehensive outside of Express Access plan. But now one of the key things we're going to be specifying from here is the ability for us to indicate if this is going towards a 401k type, traditional IRA. We'll see some of those other pivotal pieces of data entry available for us to start to carve out further, such as the annual percentage increase, when it starts and stops, if it's tied to retirement. And we can also have this be a different type of approach. Maybe it's percentage of salary income. Same thing with tax-free. We'd be indicating which tax-free asset this is going to. And then from here, we're going to click on the next button. And net worth is also going to be one of those other ones that is slightly different. So because if we recall, we had that invested assets card in the Express Access tool. Because we just broke it down by taxable, tax deferred, and tax free, we're going to see it's similarly split from here when it comes to those investments. So we can click into any of these to make adjustments as needed to any of these accounts. In this particular case, the taxable brokerage account remains the same, but if we needed to adjust maybe the asset allocation, or if we wanted to start to enter those ticker symbols or asset classes, we can also change our entry method. We can also change the type of account if needed. By using this drop down, we can toggle to any of the options that we have available to us. We can also change the owner, whether it's owned by the client, co-client, jointly owned, or if this is actually a trust account. Same thing for some of the other pieces of the plan that we entered for investments. We're going to see the tax deferred is automatically under the 401k bucket. So if we need to make an adjustment, if this is actually a different type of tax deferred asset, we can select that from here. And we can also make further adjustments. And especially in this instance, we're probably going to have more information once they exit out of Express Access, meaning we're probably going to have information about some of the other pieces of their net worth. Maybe they're letting us know that they have a business that they own. Maybe they have some additional stock plans we're looking at starting to model some equity compensation with them. We still can click on the Add Account button and add any of those accounts as we normally would. Same thing if we're trying to link those accounts from any integrations we leverage, or if the client is trying to link those accounts via account aggregation, we can also, and they can also click on the link account button as well. So there's probably going to be additional steps we're going to be adding from here, like their credit cards, other pieces of the plan. And then if we click on the next button, we can then cover those kinds of taxes and fees, such as, the tax filing status and a couple other pieces. And then for goals, because we covered retirement with them, we're going to see a couple things kind of pre-filled for us based off of what we entered in the Express Access mode. We can once again still click on the add goals the same way as we would have normally. But once we hit complete, we will then see the full planning access and the full modules of RightCapital. So we're going to see all those different pieces of the plan. We can always come back and make adjustments to any of the information that we entered, either when it was in Express or in the initial steps of onboarding, by going to profile and manipulating any of these sub-tabs as needed. So the one thing that I really want to emphasize is that the data we're entering in the Express access mode does get translated over to the full planning modules. Once we exit off of Express access, that is going to take us to the onboarding phase for clients, that initial steps of data entry, which is once again guiding us through entering the client's current plan. But because we are exiting off of the Express access mode, I just want to highlight that the default assumption for prospects is the goals-based planning methodology. And I also want to highlight how we can adjust that as needed, especially for those of you that are leveraging different types of planning methodology. So just for an example, we're going to navigate to the gear icon in the upper right-hand corner. We're going to go to settings and then to methodology. So once again, gear icon, settings, methodology. And what I'm referring to is the planning methodology that we have selected. And we have 3 different types of planning methodology available to us. Like I said, when we're using Express access, especially because we're focusing on those prospects where we might not have all the information needed, goals-based is what's being leveraged. Goals-based in general is going to be focusing on the savings and goals. That really focuses on retirement picture planning pieces. It's going to be focusing on whatever we're entering under goals. And outside of the Express access mode, you don't need to input income or expenses. Those are kind of going to be ignored. Now, the unique thing is that income is going to be leveraged when it comes to Social Security calculations. So that's why you're going to see that that's included in the Express access mode. Once we're ready to transition to the full comprehensive financial planning, that is probably when we're going to be navigating away from goals-based and looking at cash flow-based or modified cash flow-based. Just to provide additional context between the difference of each of those, cash flow-based and modified cash flow-based both take the same comprehensive approach. That's going to be considering all aspects of the plan that we can enter. It's going to be considering all their income, expenses, their goals, their savings contributions, and everything you're entering as part of the plan. The key difference between cash flow-based and modified cash flow-based is that cash flow-based is going to assume that surplus cash flow at the end of the year are automatically saved into the taxable bucket. So it means that every single dollar that we are not devoting towards expenditures are going to be saved at the end of the year. The other approach is modified cash flow-based approach, which is once again taking that comprehensive financial planning approach, except with modified cash flow-based, it's assuming that surplus cash flow at the end of the year are going to be spent off unless you're capturing it with a savings card. So what that means is that you have the flexibility to control savings. You can specify and also, more importantly, propose and see the illustrations of the impacts of additional savings. So this allows more flexibility when it comes to specifying savings, whereas cash flow based is going to assume that surplus cash flows are already invested at the end of the year into the taxable bucket. So that's the 3 main planning methodologies that are available to you. Just to highlight, like I said, Express is using goals-based because we're focusing on prospecting and really just focusing on, for a lot of that, retirement picture stuff.